This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I can't believe we're already well into the summer months. Things can move so quickly. It's important to take a moment to pause and check in. What do you want to celebrate so far from the year? And what are some adjustments you might want to make for the rest of the year? Therapy can help you take stock of your progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months. You might want to think about your family, your friendships, your personal goals. Where do you feel like you're making progress, and where do you feel like you might be able to use some help? If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. This summer, take a moment to do this. Stop comparing and start focusing. Visit betterhelp.com/innovate to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/innovate.
The Agile Brand. Welcome to the Innovation Economy podcast, where we look at the factors that drive business growth, including how people, processes, platforms, and places work together to create the future of work. I'm your co-host, Bonnie Habyan. I'm a CMO, author, speaker, branding expert, and passionate content creator. This episode is part of our Brand the Change series, which focuses on how entrepreneurs and engaged employees can leverage their personal brand and superpowers to support their company, showcase their skill sets, and create value. To listen to the latest episodes or to sign up for the Innovation Economy newsletter, go to innovationeconomy.show or click follow on your favorite podcast app to make sure you hear the latest episodes. And now, onto the show. Americans spend about 4 hours a day listening to audio. That's why today's discussion is crucial for anyone looking to make a mark in the competitive digital landscape. Joining me on this discussion today is Brandy Whalen, co-founder of Kitcaster, a podcast PR company. Podcasting isn't just a media form, it's a growing force in marketing. And Brandy is at the forefront. She's going to share her insights on the podcast PR strategy and why targeting your audience via audio can be a transformative strategy for branding, both for individuals and for businesses alike. So welcome, Brandy. It is a pleasure to have you.
I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Bonnie.
You are very welcome. And I am going to just jump right in because we have a lot to talk about here. Love podcasts. I think they are great for anyone trying to build a brand. Whether you are a CEO or an entrepreneur, it just gives you so much content. So I want to shape this a little bit. I read where the global podcasting market is projected to grow from about $24 billion in 2023 to somewhere around $131 billion by 2032. That is insane. Can you give us a little clarity into the current size and growth trends of the audio marketing industry in general?
Yeah, well, I think one of the contributors that play into that trend is just the global adoption of podcasting. I think internationally, podcasts were more of a US-based medium. And now we're seeing more content coming out of locations around the world and really increasing that listenership quite a bit. So huge growth opportunities there. And I think people are just starting to realize how they can really, even from like a B2C, B2B perspective, I feel like the B2B space is understanding how podcasts are important to them more and more. So I feel like that's been a big increase in terms of like whether it be on the guesting side, podcast launch side, and then also the advertising side. I see that as being a real big growth opportunity.
It's interesting. A couple of things that you're saying. I didn't realize that this podcast craze was a little bit limited here or, in the world, but more kind of prevalent here in the US. So that's very fascinating to learn. But also I do see from the digital landscape in general that business to business is becoming more like business to consumer in so many ways. So maybe can you elaborate a little bit on the advertising side, what you're seeing?
Sure. So it's interesting. We are, as we've been doing guesting on the podcast side, we have a lot of companies that are coming to us and asking about advertising.
Mhm.
And it's something that we hear more and more on podcasts, right? Programmatic advertising, host read advertising. So it's something that we invested in a couple years ago. We actually have another company that we launched about 12 months ago officially called Wildcast. And this is really for that B2B space to take advantage of advertising budgets, because it has been something that I think the consumer space has adopted and more versed in, and the B2B space has been a little bit slower. But it's, if you think about it, let's just say you have a cybersecurity product. Who's your target audience?
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. You're right. You can really niche down in that too if you need to. Well, businesses obviously are your
Yeah.
huge audience, but I mean, I think what is beautiful about podcasts, you can get pretty specific in knowing who it is that you're in front of. I mean, I
Yes.
very quickly could tell you what our demographics are, right? People ask me, I go, oh, they're high achieving professionals, entrepreneurs, people that are probably very fast tracking their careers. They want to listen and learn and stay on the forefront and the cutting edge of what's coming down the pike. And I'm sure you as
Mhm.
well probably know on the top of your mind some of these podcasts that you could say right away, yeah, that's where you want to be. And I know that because I'm telling you, this is kind of what we're seeing from a data perspective. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have that. And I think I was probably a little bit of a naysayer maybe 5, 6 years ago. It's just audio. That's not, it's podcast. Listen, radio's kind of gone out the way in some respects. It's come back through Sirius, but I just don't get this thing. And now I am huge on it. So sometimes you just have to kind of go with the trend and see where things are. In fact, I've read that most people during the day, some of them will listen to podcasts as much as like 4 hours a day. I mean, you
Yeah.
can take it with you anywhere. And I think what's interesting is that podcasts have really democratized, in some respects, I would say, the broadcasting world, because anybody can have one. Anyone
Mhm.
can have a shot now at expressing something if they have something to say or if they're looking to engage people. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. The barrier to entry in the podcast world is pretty minimal, really. And I would say just even in the last 5 years with the audio equipment, I think back to even 10, 15 years ago when podcasts really started to gain popularity, people would be going to studios and producing their podcasts, like a soundproof
Yes,
studio
I
with
remember that. Yes.
huge, with boom mics, and it was a whole setup. And now we're in our home recording great audio and all the tools that we're able to use. It's like we've definitely have seen an increase in tools and just allowing people to be wherever they need to be in order to record, which is pretty incredible. And it's something that we always have to talk about to our clients, that podcast hosts. It's thinking about traditional radio, those were journalists typically, right? They come from the world
Absolutely.
of
They studied it,
journalism.
right, absolutely, or many of them were writers first or newspaper reporters first. They were journalists for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and that's shifted quite a bit. You can just be anyone, and you have an idea or you have an interest, and you can put yourself out there, you can invite guests on. As you can grow a whole listenership just by being engaged and getting like very pretty simple, minimal equipment and tools.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic showed us very quickly what we have to do, can do when we don't have a soundproof room. But
Yes.
I also think the podcast offers this intimacy that
Oh, yeah.
perhaps radios and radio programs and maybe other sorts of mediums don't. There's an intimacy, there's a following, there's a connection. What do you see with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I see podcasting as being really a parasocial relationship, right? You can be tuning into a conversation and feel like, especially if you're listening to somebody who's really good at storytelling and really good at making that connection with the listener and make you feel like you're just eavesdropping, like you're at a coffee shop, or maybe you're in an airport and you're just like listening in on a conversation, and you walk away and you feel like you have a piece of that, like, you know them, like there's kind of this like personal attachment that you have to these podcast hosts and the guests that you're listening to. It's really quite amazing. And I feel like there's a certain level of brand loyalty that you get from listening to someone talk about, the passion and mission and the impact that they've made in the company that they're running. It's really quite incredible.
Yeah, I've seen such a shift. I've seen people as well working at corporations similar to myself go out and create, a podcast that may not be directly tied to the company, but they're able to now kind of go out there and express their passions in a way that they're able to reach people where they couldn't 10, 15 years ago. And so that kind of leads me into something I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Give me some insights into how successful entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs, CEOs, anyone that is looking to go out there to develop a little bit of a thought leadership, personal brand strategy should approach the podcast in their realm of integrating it into their kind of, secret sauce.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of thinking about how you're presenting yourself to the world, right? And what are all the different avenues in which you can do that? And I feel like podcasts are kind of that central unit, because when you're going on podcasts, you're creating content, and that content can be shared across all of your platforms as you're building your brand, right? So if you kind of start in this place where you're having an engaging conversation, somebody's kind of walking you down the path, right? They're asking you those leading questions. You're able to answer them, you're able to give your perspective, and then you're able to share that widely across all of your channels. You can create those podcasts into blog, depending on how far in depth you go. Maybe you're talking to a very technical audience and you have a technical host asking you questions. That's a case study. I mean, thinking about all the different ways in which you can use podcasting as that really that central piece to building your personal brand. And it's a pretty, I mean, I think as low of a barrier of entry it is into being launching a podcast, being a guest on a podcast, it's the same thing. If you have a particular expertise and you're searching out podcasts that interview guests that are in your wheelhouse, in your sphere of influence, reaching out to that podcast host, giving them a little teaser of what you can bring to their listeners, what kind of information you can bring to the conversation. It's a pretty easy thing to do. It's a nice place for people to start.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. I can't believe we're already well into the summer months. Things can move so quickly. It's important to take a moment to pause and check in. What do you want to celebrate so far from the year? And what are some adjustments you might want to make for the rest of the year? Therapy can help you take stock of your progress and set achievable goals for the next 6 months. You might want to think about your family, your friendships, your personal goals. Where do you feel like you're making progress, and where do you feel like you might be able to use some help? If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. This summer, take a moment to do this. Stop comparing and start focusing. Visit betterhelp.com/innovate to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/innovate.
Well, let's talk about starting, because this can be daunting, even to your most seasoned CEOs. Where do I
Yeah.
start with that? What do I need to do? I don't know how. And it can be a little scary. So let's walk through that. If you are someone out there trying to build your presence and you have something to say, how do you start becoming a podcast guest? And more importantly, what are the things that make you a good podcast guest?
Yes, yes. So thinking about the things that you can bring to the conversation is the place where I always tell people to start. Even just thinking about those key words, like how would you identify yourself, the conversation that you're going to be able to bring to podcasts. Maybe that you specialize in a certain technology, maybe it's a service, but thinking about those keywords and then finding those podcasts that fall into that category and building kind of unique talking points. Do a little digging. Look at the podcast episodes that a particular podcast that would be a good fit for you has released in the last 2, 3 months? What kind of conversations are they having? And really speak to that podcast host. So if you're interested in being a guest, you think it's a really good fit, thinking about like, okay, so I noticed that they did an interview with somebody who talked about how to incorporate AI into recruiting. And perhaps you can take it a step further, or you have a completely different angle. Attaching yourself to something that was talked about previously, like you're tuned in, you're paying attention, you care about this podcast, and you care about what you're going to be able to contribute to this podcast. So I think that just in determining which podcast and how to approach it and giving it that level of personalization is really important.
Yeah, well, two things. Do they need a podcast one pager, or should they have something that kind of shows that they've done this before? What if you have never done it in the past? You're looking to crack into this kind of podcast guesting. And, A, what do you have to bring that shows you are professional and credible? And B, how do you knock on these doors of people who probably get inquiries all day long?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you absolutely can create a one pager, but it's not necessary. I would say that some hosts do want to hear how you're showing up to conversations. That is a criteria that folks have. They want to know that you're well spoken, that you can engage and connect, and what you're going to share is going to be important, that you're going to be a good guest. So if you don't have that experience, how can you demonstrate that? If you've given talks, if you've participated in a webinar, like feel
Hmm.
free to pass that along as an example of how you're showing up to these other conversations. They're not necessarily podcasts, but they're giving the podcast host a taste of how you communicate. And if you don't have any of that, I always think it's nice to be honest. I've never done this before, but I actually think I'd be a really great guest. And I understand the nuances to podcasting. And I understand that you want guests that are going to create value for your listeners. And here's how I can do that. And if you want to just get on a call with me and chat for 10 minutes and see if it's a fit, I would be very open to that.
All right. So, what are the do's and don'ts of being a podcast guest? Because I think there are some protocols, or at least you should try and practice one or two protocols to make sure that if you go through this process and you want to be asked again, or if somehow you have to get a referral or whatever, you want to have a good experience. So, what are a few things that you recommend?
Yeah. So I think you have to don't think of podcasting as a marketing exercise. I think that is a real mistake that people make. They get on a podcast, they are asked about themselves, they give their resume, a rundown of every place they've worked and their education. And, that's a challenging start to a conversation. And I get it because that's kind of like in a kind of a marketing job situation, maybe you are giving your resume, but I always tell our clients, like, if somebody's interested in that, they're going to go to LinkedIn. They can go and look at your background and your resume, but come to the conversation ready to share. Don't sell. Provide value.
I know. I think that's the best advice you can absolutely give. I don't think people realize that enough when they're coming to do something. People really don't care so much about where you've come from. They just want to know what you know. Give me something I can use today, right?
Yes, yes. And I always say too, like, make sure that you're connecting with the listeners. Find an identifiable character. So if you're talking about, I keep using cybersecurity as an example, but I'm going to continue to do that because we're already here. So let's say that you have a cybersecurity company and your focus is on healthcare. Instead of like saying that, I have a cybersecurity company and my focus is on healthcare. Like, talk about scenarios. Like, we have clients that come to us. They're they're struggling with these issues, like something that people can identify with. Like, and it could be real personal too. Like, really paint the picture. They're losing sleep at night. They can't keep a team. Like, they're struggling with all these things that there's a good chance that the listeners are also struggling with some of these things, and they're more likely to stay connected to the conversation and move through. I mean, you're asking people to invest time, which time is the most precious thing we have. So if you're asking people to spend 30 to 40 minutes listening to you, really connect with them.
Okay. And so I'm going to share something with you talking about
Yeah.
connecting. So I know that you have this incredible agency that is actually key in helping people develop the strategy. But I want to share with you how I came about actually hosting my own podcast. And it was through a very
Yes.
grassroots effort. Of course, listen, I've always been in something to do with public speaking, or I'm a speaker on the side. So this is all natural and feels very comfortable, but you still have to go out there. So I remember a couple of years ago, I said, okay, I'm going to start this process a little bit, did my one pager, went on a couple of these services where you can pay to actually match up with other people that are looking for guests, drove that hard for about a year, started getting on that, started finding others, like you said, of ones that I'd like to be on. And one was Greg Kihlström. We
Mhm.
connected. Next thing you know, you just have this connection. You provide value to each other. And here I am. Hey, would you like to be, a guest host? Okay. And now I'm a host. So, I mean, it was just an amazing example of how, if it is something you truly want, and if it is something you start to find you feel comfortable in, you can build it to whatever you want. And talk about being able to leverage it. You brought that up earlier. Once you're on a podcast, you can download the transcript, create an article from it, put it over, several different channels and platforms. Cut it up if you want to.
Yeah.
There's many things that you can do with it. So I do think that someone, whether you're a solopreneur, whatever, you can use it and create a whole strategy around it.
Absolutely. I mean, we had this really interesting case study from a client. He had been a client with us for 3 years. He had gone on close to 115 podcasts, different podcasts.
Through you or by himself? He by himself.
Through us,
Through you.
through
Okay.
us, yes. We had worked with him for quite some time, and it was so funny because every time we would send him a new opportunity, he was like, "Okay, this is wonderful. Thank you so much." And I was always like, "Gosh, it's, like, he loves this. He's gonna keep going forever." Well, he took all of those podcast interviews, he submitted them to a company that creates books. He had a whole book written
Yeah.
about his sales
Yes.
strategies
Yeah.
based on all of his podcast interviews. He didn't have to meet with this company one single time. He simply sent them his interviews. They wrote the book, published it, done.
Yeah.
It's
See,
amazing.
that's a really cool case study and concept. And I was going to ask you, that's one success story. Do you have another one you could share about something similar that kind of wowed you? Maybe someone you started with, and the next thing you know, you're like, oh my goodness gracious, look how they leveraged this opportunity.
Yeah, there's so many. We've had a lot of clients who have received investment. So they're kind of at that stage in their company where they're seeking investment, and they have connected with potential investors and ended up securing deals through podcasting, because it is one of those unique platforms where if you are an investor and you're investing in a person, you get to really understand who they are and how they operate on listening to them on podcasts. So we've had quite a few clients that fall into that category. One interesting case study was a young female entrepreneur, and we had been working with her for probably close to 8 months. She came to me and said, "You know what? Like, this whole experience has been so incredible. Like, not only has it been fun to go and meet these podcast hosts, tell my story, but I've gotten so much better at communicating with my board. Like, just in she's like, I have so much more confidence now. Like, I understand the things that are connecting. Like, when I'm watching a host connect with what I'm saying, I can then take those pieces. Like, when I see their face light up and they get
Mhm.
excited and they start asking me more questions, I'm taking those pieces to the board because those are the same pieces that are going to get my board excited." So that was just really cool. I mean, I just saw this complete transformation, and you could just see in her energy and the way that she was holding herself by the end of her podcast tour that it was just like a completely different person. It was beautiful.
Yeah, they're the good things that you like to see, right? I mean, if you're putting yourself out there, you feel like you have something to share, then you become, in some respects, worth knowing. And that's got to be a great thing for someone who's trying to either build their personal brand a little bit or trying just to get out there to do something special for their company. That's a wonderful, wonderful realization. And so when you start doing this, you can have a startup company who says, I'm going to start on this podcast journey, paid or not, right? They could do it on their own. They could come
Yes.
to your agency. However they go about this, how do they eventually calculate ROI?
Oh, Bonnie, that is such a good question. Yeah, the ROI piece is really challenging for us.
I know. Well, I worked in PR for many years. And I
Yeah,
remember having to somehow show this. To me, I'm like, it's brand awareness. It's people understanding you. It's getting
yeah,
yourself up there with them. But it's a lot of that's all nebulous. In a world where there's so much data, people want to know, well, what
totally.
has this done for me?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, here's the deal. It's really hard and coming from the PR world and we do see this activity as a very much like top of funnel, right? Brand awareness, you're
Top of funnel, for
educate
sure. Hmm.
yeah, you're educating people, you're entering a new market space, you're making a name for yourself. The ROI piece is something that is will be totally candid is still, when we're talking in a world of data and metrics, it's really hard because we have tools that we use. We use Podchaser, we've used Listen Notes. There are tools out there, but we haven't found anything that gives us real accurate data. And I podcasting is fairly young still. And I think too, because people are streaming from so many different
They are.
platforms,
They are.
to aggregate all of that listenership, it was beautiful at one point when we were mostly looking at downloads. Like that's a pretty easy number to see. And most hosts would have that information and would be more than happy to share that. But now we're in this world where like I don't remember the last time that I downloaded a podcast episode. I stream them on Spotify,
Yeah.
I'm watching them on YouTube. Like I'm tapping into a lot of different places to find this content. And it's also evergreen, right? Like it's there for the shelf life is long on podcasting. And like I've done this where I've stumbled upon a new podcast that I'm like, wow, this is amazing. This host is incredible. And I'll do a total deep dive. Like I go back like a year, 2 years and binge listen to all of the
Oh
episodes.
gosh, give me a good crime one. It's
Yeah.
ridiculous. I'm if people knew how many of the different ones I find, this is great. But I'm like you, I love this series. Now I want to see something like it. And then of course it comes up. If you like this, you'll like that. Okay, I'll try it. But I think you're right, and I think you did hit on one or two things. If you get a large investor, if you get a transaction or a deal from it, if you get another opportunity. And there's also when people realize, when people are searching for you, like this digital world is now what drives so much of our brand reputation. People who
Yeah,
are searching for you see that podcast come up. They
they
see,
do.
then they think of you as more of a thought leader or you do have more credibility. So it's those sorts of things that may not be 100%, this is what I'm going to give you and is what it means, but it is more of that top of the funnel, longer term brand awareness that you get from I would say something that could be low cost, great opportunity, and can use that content to put onto other channels, slice, dice, create, or write a book if you want, right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I would say too, the SEO piece to podcasting is pretty significant. You can get backlinks to your company website, to your personal brands, whatever that might be. And also, as you mentioned, I mean, I'll go and just do a search on a client and I'm looking at like 5 pages of
I know.
podcasts and
Hmm.
the transcription, and then,
Hmm.
depending on the podcast, a lot of times they'll have a blog or a new there's just so many different avenues that it's really I mean, the benefits of it it's so vast. It's really beautiful, and it's I get it because we do kind of still fall into that marketing bucket, and so much of that most marketing activities you can attach data to, but it's a little bit harder in the podcast world.
You hit on something with the SEO. What are you seeing with audio SEO, the rise of voice search? How is podcasting playing into that a little bit? Is that something that's also helpful? I don't do a ton of voice search. I don't, but
Yeah,
other people do. Maybe it's just something with, I don't know, but I am seeing I'm a marketer. So you start looking into these things. I see that's
sure.
growing. I have to think about it. It's around the corner. What are you seeing?
I mean, I think it's only gonna gain in popularity. I mean, you think about smart speakers, voice assistants,
Mhm.
Alexa, like all of these devices that we are already leveraging and will only continue to leverage more. I think that that will just become more and more of how we do things and search things. I mean, I think it's and you also think about like just kind of this idea of audio marketing feeding into just like micro podcasts too. Like,
Yes, shorts, video, YouTube shorts, the micro podcasts, I think are going to continue to do well because people don't have time. They want it right now. I mean, they want it
yes,
yesterday. What can you give me in 2 seconds or less? And that's why I'm a big proponent. I don't like long podcasts. That's why I tell you about a half hour. Anything over that, I just feel gets a little long. But
yeah.
I'm thinking of the voice assistant because the other night I'm flipping around on TV and the next thing I hit something and it's voice assistant activated. So then I'm hearing, now I don't know how to turn off the voice assistant activated. This is at level 3. This is at level 4. I'm like, oh my goodness, I'll worry about it tomorrow. And I fixed it the next day. But I think you're right. That is just all over the place with these voice assistants and that's going to continue to grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let me ask you, what do you see this podcast overall, kind of from a comprehensive content standpoint? Where do you see it going in the overall kind of marketing mix for a personal brand in the next 10, 15 years? Are we going to still be talking about podcasts in 5 years? Or are we going to be talking about something else?
Oh my gosh, I know, right? I think about that because I used to say this and I don't anymore. But when we first started the company, it's like, podcast is like the new blog. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because everything does kind of have its seasons and cycles. And I mean, I think because we're such a connected society. I mean, you look around everywhere. I was chuckling last night. I was on a walk and I saw a couple walking down the street and they both had headphones on, like
That's
ear
real intimate,
headphones.
right? I
I know. I
know.
was like, what, are they listening to the
Sad.
same thing?
No,
Like, what's going
absolutely
on?
not. No, yeah. So what's the purpose of the walk? Oh, it's kind of sad, but true.
But it's true. I mean, that was like such an extreme example, but everywhere you go, like you're at the grocery store, people are plugged into their AirPods. You're commuting on public transit. Like everything that you do, people are connected. We want to be fed content all the time.
I know.
It's like TikTok. It's like everything.
I
Like people
know.
don't even
So true.
and you look at the younger generation, like I have 3 teenagers and just watching how they consume. So I think that I mean, like I said, like I really think that micro pieces are gonna become ever more prominent in not only video but also audio. I think that brands are going to get really strategic too with
Mhm.
how they position themselves with audio, like creating maybe a mystery series, branded by
Yep.
a big company like Coca-Cola. Like
Right.
Coca-Cola is bringing
Right.
you this like murder mystery that's never solved.
Oh, I'd be all over it. Yeah, like absolutely. And who would have ever thought that you'd have some brands that would be tapping into that sort of genre? But it is what it is. I think we have to look at the elephant in the room. Whatever people are consuming, if they want more of it, they'll be drinking a Coke while they're listening. So I mean, whatever. you know.
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it will always continue to evolve and change with the trends, but we're connected. I mean, that's just the reality of the way that we're currently consuming all content.
We
We're
are.
yeah. So for better or worse, that's kind of where we're at.
I totally agree. And we're coming up on that bewitching hour when I say I don't like to go past 30 too much. So I
Yes.
wanted to ask you this. I always try and leave our audience with 3 pieces of actionable advice that they can take away and use today. So this is what I'm going to ask you. What are 3 pieces of advice you'd give to someone? Again, it doesn't matter. A newbie just starting out in their career, someone who just started a business, or a CEO at one of the top companies in the world. What are 3 pieces of advice you would give them to start their podcasting journey now?
Yeah. So the first piece of advice is just do it yourself. I mean, of course, like would love to work with you, but I feel like it's like too many people. Earned media is where I feel like podcasting definitely falls into that category. And who can sell your story better than you? And if you're, especially for starting out entrepreneur, if you don't have the cash flow to hire a PR person or a podcast agency, this is a perfect place to just kind of dip your toe in. Just do it. And
Yeah.
with AI tools, you can write like a beautiful pitch and send it to a lot of different podcasts or any sort of media outlets. So I'm a big proponent of doing it yourself, especially in the beginning of wherever you're at in your career journey. So that would be my number one
One.
piece of
Okay.
advice.
Number 2.
Number two, I think creating content as much as you can. Like once you go on to podcasts and you're able to, there's so many tools to use. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's not a huge lift. Get the content, share it on social media, start building a brand for yourself and using like AI tools to even kind of build prompts for yourself. I always call it like
Absolutely.
those little snackable moments.
Brainstorming, the best brainstorming tool there is.
Yes, yes. So brainstorm with AI and like get some good
Mhm.
juicy content. Like start to make a name for yourself in whatever industry you're in and develop those kind of mic drop moments. And I guess the last piece of advice that I would have is just stay consistent. Stay with it. I think all too many times we start something and then we drop it because maybe it's not you don't see immediate results, but stick with it because I feel like especially in the world of podcasting, the more you put into it, the longer you do it, staying consistent, it will pay off.
Thank you, Brandy, for joining us today. There's nothing like a good podcast to learn and grow from. And the platform and the opportunities continue to expand. So if you're looking to grow your brand, think about integrating various strategies: social, PR, podcast, speaking. There's no one right way, but for certain, there are a growing number of ways to do it, and podcasts are one of them. So if you'd like to learn more about Brandy, her information will be in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the Innovation Economy podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.innovationeconomy.show. The Innovation Economy is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, let's keep innovating.
The Agile Brand.
Hi, I'm Mark Slayton, the host of the Delighted Customers podcast and the creator of the Trusted Guide Roadmap. The number one challenge of any change leader is getting executive buy-in. Without it, CX practices are destined to fail. You know the frustration when you don't have the support that you need. That's why I developed the Trusted Guide Roadmap Masterclass. It's unique because it's live, interpersonal, hands-on, and we give you proven frameworks, tools, calculators, and other resources to empower you to effectively lead change. To learn more, visit empoweredtx.com. Enrollment is now open for this quarter's masterclass starting October 16th. Don't miss your chance to join us.